He thought he was turning away just another window shopper, but had no idea he had just failed a test that would cost him everything. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below, and if you believe respect should never depend on appearance, stay with this story. The morning sun spilled across the polished marble floors of Cole Automotive Gallery, a luxury showroom where every reflection seemed sharper, brighter, more expensive than reality itself, and where every customer was measured long before they spoke a word. Olivia Hayes stepped through the glass doors quietly, her sneakers barely making a sound against the stone, her simple denim jacket and faded jeans standing in stark contrast to the tailored suits and designer heels that usually filled the space. And yet her eyes moved differently, steady, observant, taking in not just the cars but the people, the spacing, the subtle choreography of attention and neglect that defined places like this. A midnight blue coupe sat elevated under a ring of soft white lights, its curves flawless, its presence commanding, and Olivia paused just long enough to study it with a familiarity that didn't belong to a casual browser. But before she could step closer, a voice cut in, smooth but edged with impatience. "Ma'am, those models are by appointment only," Ryan Cole said, adjusting his cufflinks as he approached, his smile polished but hollow, his gaze already dismissing her before she had a chance to respond. Olivia turned to him calmly, her expression neutral, almost curious, as if she were more interested in his reaction than the car itself. "I'd like to know more about that one," she said softly, her tone even, her posture relaxed. But Ryan's smile tightened just a fraction, the kind of micro-expression that revealed more than words ever could. Around them, two other sales associates exchanged quick glances, their attention flickering between Olivia's worn sneakers and the six-figure vehicle she had just indicated. And somewhere near the reception desk, a quiet chuckle slipped out, quickly stifled but not unnoticed. "That vehicle starts at $320,000, Ryan replied, his voice now carrying just enough volume to draw attention, just enough to make it public, and the air shifted, subtle but undeniable, as nearby conversation slowed and eyes drifted toward the unfolding interaction. Olivia nodded once, as if confirming something to herself rather than reacting to him, and for a brief moment, silence stretched between them, thin but heavy, like the calm before something unseen begins to move. "That's fine," she said, her voice still steady, still unbothered, and for a split second, Ryan hesitated, not because he believed her, but because something in her composure didn't match the script he had already written for her, and yet training, ego, and habit won out. "I think you'd be more comfortable looking at our pre-owned inventory," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the exit as if the direction itself carried the message, and this time, the laughter wasn't entirely hidden. Olivia's gaze moved across the showroom one last time, not lingering on the cars, but on the people, the posture, the small decisions being made in real time, and then she simply nodded, turning without argument, without protest, her footsteps just as quiet as when she had entered, and as the glass doors closed behind her, the showroom exhaled, conversations resumed, and Ryan straightened his jacket, convinced the moment was over, unaware that somewhere, just beyond those doors, a single message had already been sent. Olivia Hayes did not rush once she stepped outside, the late morning air cooler than the showroom, carrying the faint scent of asphalt warming under the sun as she walked across the parking lot with the same measured pace, her expression unchanged, her mind already moving 3 steps ahead while behind her, inside the glass walls, Ryan Cole was laughing quietly with 2 associates, replaying the interaction with the confidence of someone who believed he had just handled the distraction efficiently, and yet beneath that confidence there was a flicker of irritation he could not quite place, something about her composure, something about the way she had looked at the room instead of reacting to him, as if she had been evaluating, rather than experiencing the moment. But he brushed it aside quickly, turning his attention back to a well-dressed couple who had just entered, his tone instantly shifting into polished enthusiasm, his posture straightening, his smile becoming warmer, more attentive, more respectful. The transformation so seamless it almost looked rehearsed, because in many ways it was, and around him the showroom returned to its usual rhythm, phones ringing softly, keyboards tapping, low conversations blending into the hum of commerce, until, Almost simultaneously, a sharp chime echoed from multiple devices, one after another, cutting through the air with unnatural precision, and for a brief second no one reacted, assuming it was coincidence, until the second wave came, louder, more insistent, notifications lighting up screens across the showroom like a synchronized signal, and Ryan frowned, glancing down at his phone with mild annoyance before unlocking it, expecting a routine update, perhaps a client inquiry or a system alert. But what he saw did not register immediately, his eyes scanning the message once, then again, the words refusing to settle into something familiar, while across the room the same silence began to spread. One by one conversations stopped, heads lowered, expressions shifted, confusion tightening into something sharper, something heavier, and the showroom, so recently filled with quiet arrogance and controlled movement, began to feel smaller, as if the walls themselves were listening. Ryan's jaw tensed as he read the subject line again. The sender unmistakable, the authority behind it impossible to ignore, and suddenly the earlier moment replayed in his mind not as a dismissal, but as a detail, a variable he had overlooked, and across from him one of the junior associates whispered under his breath, asking if anyone else had received the same message. But the answer was already obvious in the way every screen glowed, every face turned pale, every posture shifted from confidence to uncertainty, and somewhere near the reception desk, the faint sound of heels stopped mid-step, frozen in place as the realization began to settle, slow and undeniable, that whatever this message meant, it was not routine, it was not small, and it was not optional. And as Ryan lifted his head, scanning the room for confirmation, for control, for anything that would restore the balance he had just minutes ago taken for granted, he felt it for the first time, not fear, not yet, but the unmistakable crack in certainty. The moment when a man realizes that the situation he thought he controlled may have already moved beyond him, and outside, just beyond the glass. Olivia Hayes paused beside a black sedan, her phone still in her hand, the screen dimming as the single word she had sent minutes earlier had already begun to unfold exactly as intended. Ryan Cole felt the room shift before anyone said a word, the kind of shift that did not come from noise but from silence, heavy and unnatural, as if every person in the showroom had suddenly remembered something important at the exact same time. And as he looked down at his phone again, forcing himself to read the message slowly, carefully, the words finally began to settle into place with a clarity that made his chest tighten. The subject line stamped in bold authority, internal directive, immediate compliance required, and beneath it a name he recognized instantly, but had never expected to see in this context. Jonathan Hayes, Chief Executive Officer, Hayes Automotive Group, the parent company that quietly owned not just this showroom, but dozens across the country, a name that carried weight in every quarterly meeting, every performance review, every whispered conversation about leadership and standards. And Ryan's throat went dry as his eyes moved to the body of the message, each sentence precise, controlled, leaving no room for interpretation. Effective immediately, all showroom staff are to pause current sales activity and review updated customer interaction protocols. A full compliance audit is now in progress. Failure to meet standards will result in immediate restructuring decisions. And for a brief moment Ryan exhaled, a flicker of relief surfacing as he tried to convince himself this was just another corporate sweep, another routine tightening of procedures, something he had navigated before. But then his gaze dropped to the final line, and everything inside him stilled. This audit has already begun, and his mind, almost against his will, pulled him back to the last 15 minutes, to the woman in denim, to her calm voice, to the way she had looked at the room, not as a customer, but as someone taking notes. And across the showroom the same realization began to ripple outward, subtle at first, then sharper, more visible, as employees glanced at each other, comparing screens, whispering fragments of the same message, their earlier confidence dissolving into uncertainty, one associate stepping back from a client mid-sentence, another slowly lowering a brochure as if it no longer belonged in his hands, and near the reception desk, the manager on duty straightened abruptly, her expression tightening as she reread the directive, her eyes darting toward Ryan with a question she did not dare to ask out loud, because the answer was already forming in the silence between them. and Ryan felt it fully now, the crack widening, the certainty slipping, replaced by a cold awareness that this was not random, not coincidental, not detached from what had just happened. And as he lifted his head, scanning the room, he noticed something else, something that had not been there before, the absence of movement outside the glass doors, the reflection of the parking lot showing a figure still standing by a black sedan, unmoving, watching, and for the first time since he had stepped into his role as sales director, Ryan Cole felt what it meant to be on the other side of evaluation, not the one judging, but the one being measured, and the realization did not come with noise or confrontation. It came quietly, like a door closing somewhere behind him, final and unseen, leaving him standing in a room that suddenly felt very different from the one he thought he controlled just moments ago. The message did not fade from the screens. It stayed there, unmoving, as if daring each person in the showroom to pretend they had not seen it. And for a long second no one spoke, no one moved, until the manager on duty, Claire Dawson, cleared her throat softly, the sound sharp against the silence, her voice lower than usual, but carrying an urgency that had not been there before as she said they needed to pause all interactions immediately, her eyes flicking between the staff and the glass doors as if trying to connect something she could not yet fully explain, and one by one conversations with customers dissolved into awkward apologies. Brochures were lowered, test drive keys remained untouched on the counter, and the polished rhythm of sales that had filled the space just minutes ago unraveled into something uncertain and exposed. While Ryan stood near the center of it all, his phone still in his hand, his mind racing not forward but backward, replaying every word he had said, every glance, every decision made in those few minutes that now felt dangerously significant. And as he looked toward the entrance again, he saw her still there, Olivia Hayes, standing beside the black sedan, her posture unchanged, her attention fixed not on any single person but on the entire scene unfolding behind the glass, as if she were observing the results of an experiment rather than waiting for service. And something about that stillness unsettled him more than any confrontation could have, because it suggested control, intention, design, and without fully realizing it, Ryan took a step toward the door, then another, each movement slower than the last as the weight of the moment pressed down around him, the marble floor echoing faintly beneath his shoes, the eyes of his staff following him not with confidence but with quiet expectation, as if he alone could restore whatever had just been disrupted. And when he reached the glass doors, his hand hovered for a brief second before pushing them open, the outside air rushing in as a contrast to the controlled environment he had just left behind. And for the first time since the message arrived, there was no barrier between him and the woman he had dismissed, no polished counter, no curated space, just open air, and a silence that felt far more honest. And Olivia turned slightly as he approached, her expression calm, unreadable, her eyes steady in a way that made it clear she had been expecting this moment. And Ryan forced a professional tone back into his voice, though it carried a strain he could not fully hide as he began to speak, telling her there may have been a misunderstanding, that the showroom was currently undergoing an internal review, that he would be more than happy to personally assist her now. But even as the words left his mouth, they sounded different, thinner, as if they no longer held the authority they once did. And Olivia listened without interruption, without reaction, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough for Ryan to hear his own voice against it. And when she finally spoke, it was not loud, not confrontational, but precise, each word placed with quiet certainty as she said she was not there for assistance. She was there for observation, and the simplicity of that statement landed heavier than any accusation, because in that moment, Ryan understood that the interaction he thought he had controlled had never been about selling a car. It had been about something far more consequential, something already decided before he ever opened his mouth. And behind him, through the glass, the showroom stood still, every employee watching, every screen still lit, every second stretching longer than it should, as the realization settled into place that the outcome of this moment would not be determined by what he said next, but by what he had already done. Ryan Cole stood there with the weight of her words settling in deeper than anything he had read on the screen, because observation meant something had already been recorded, already measured, already judged, and for the first time the confidence that had defined his every movement inside that showroom began to feel misplaced, almost fragile, as if it had been built on assumptions that no longer held. And he opened his mouth again, slower this time, more careful, asking what exactly she meant by observation. But Olivia Hayes did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze past him, through the glass walls, toward the employees frozen in place, their phones still in their hands, their posture stiff with uncertainty. And when she spoke again, her voice carried just enough clarity to reach both him and the room behind him as she said that every interaction in that showroom was part of a pattern, every greeting, every dismissal, every decision about who deserved attention and who did not. And today was not the first time that pattern had been noted, only the first time it had been tested directly, and Ryan felt a chill move through him as the words connected with the message on his phone, the audit, the compliance review, the immediate restructuring, all of it no longer abstract, but tied directly to the moment he had just tried to dismiss as routine. And inside the showroom, Claire Dawson took a step closer to the glass, her expression tightening as she realized the conversation outside was no longer private, the distance no longer enough to separate the staff from what was unfolding, and a low murmur began to build, quiet but undeniable, as the employees started to understand that the situation had shifted beyond a simple corporate directive into something far more personal, far more immediate. And Ryan lowered his voice instinctively, trying to regain some control, telling Olivia that if there had been any lapse in service he would address it immediately, that the team could correct whatever issue had been identified. But even as he spoke, the words sounded reactive, too late, as if they belonged to a different moment that had already passed. And Olivia finally looked back at him, her expression still calm, still steady, but now carrying a weight that had not been there before, as she said that correction only mattered before the pattern was confirmed, not after, and that what happened inside that showroom was not a mistake. It was consistency, and consistency was what defined a system, not a single employee, not a single moment, but the culture that allowed it to repeat without question. And Ryan's mind moved quickly now, searching for something to counter, something to reframe. But there was nothing to hold on to because every detail she referenced had already occurred exactly as she described, and behind him the silence deepened, the earlier confidence replaced by a collective awareness that they were no longer just employees in a showroom. They were subjects in an evaluation they had not even realized was happening. And Olivia shifted her stance slightly, her hand lowering to her side, as if the moment had reached its natural conclusion, and she said quietly that the results of the audit would be finalized within the hour, that leadership would review every interaction log today, and that decisions would follow without delay. And she paused just long enough for the words to settle before adding one final line, not directed only at Ryan, but at the entire space behind him. That respect was never tested in perfect conditions. It was revealed in moments when no one thought they were being watched. And for a brief second, nothing moved. No one spoke. And Ryan felt the full weight of that truth settle in as he realized that whatever came next had already been set in motion long before he ever decided who belonged in that showroom and who did not. The silence did not break immediately after Olivia Hayes finished speaking. It lingered, stretching across the polished showroom and out into the open air like something tangible, something that refused to be ignored. And Ryan Cole felt it pressing against him from all sides, not as pressure from others, but as a realization forming inside himself, slow and undeniable, that the moment he thought he could still manage had already moved beyond his control. And for the first time he did not respond right away, his usual instinct to fill space with confidence replaced by a hesitation that spoke louder than words, while behind him, through the glass, the employees stood almost motionless, their earlier murmurs fading into a heavy quiet as they watched the exchange unfold with a clarity they had not possessed before, each of them replaying their own actions, their own assumptions, their own quick judgments that now seemed far less harmless than they had only minutes ago. And Claire Dawson lowered her phone slightly, her eyes narrowing as she read the message again, this time not as a distant directive, but as something immediate, something already in motion, the phrase full compliance audit echoing in her mind as she glanced at her team, at the way they had operated, the patterns she had overlooked, the moments she had allowed to pass without correction. And outside, Olivia shifted her weight slightly, not impatient, not rushed, but grounded, as if time itself was no longer something she needed to chase. And Ryan finally spoke again, his voice quieter now, stripped of the polished edge it once carried, asking if there was anything he could do at this point to address what had happened. But even as the question left him, it carried an understanding that the answer would not offer him the control he was used to. And Olivia met his gaze without hesitation, her eyes steady, her expression unchanged, and she said that what mattered had already been done, not in the last few minutes, but in the consistency of behavior that led to them, that audits did not exist to punish a single action, but to reveal a system, and systems were defined by repetition, by what people did when they believed it did not matter. And Ryan felt that settled deeper than anything else, because there was no argument against it, no way to reframe it as a misunderstanding or an isolated incident. And inside the showroom, a soft vibration rippled again across the room as another update appeared on their screens, this time shorter, more direct, requesting all staff remain on site pending immediate review. And the words landed like a quiet confirmation that everything Olivia had said was already unfolding in real time. And one of the junior associates exhaled sharply, the sound breaking the stillness for just a moment before fading again, replaced by the awareness that they were no longer in control of the outcome, only witnesses to it. And Ryan glanced back once more at the room he had managed for years, the place where he had built his reputation, where he had believed he understood every variable, every expectation, and now it felt different, not because the space had changed, but because he had finally seen it from another perspective, one he had never considered. And when he looked back at Olivia, there was nothing left to negotiate, nothing left to defend, only the quiet understanding that the evaluation was complete, and she gave a slight nod, not as approval, not as dismissal, but as acknowledgement that the moment had reached its natural end. And as she turned toward her car, the reflection of the showroom behind her remained still, every employee watching, every screen lit, every second stretching just long enough for the lesson to settle in fully, not through confrontation, but through clarity, the kind that arrives too late to change what has already been decided. The sound of the car door closing was soft, almost insignificant, yet it carried through the stillness like a final note that marked the end of something no one inside the showroom could yet fully name. And as Olivia Hayes settled into the driver's seat of the black sedan, she did not rush to start the engine, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, her gaze lifting once more toward the glass facade where every employee remained exactly where they had been, as if movement itself had become a decision they were no longer ready to make. And inside, Ryan Cole stood rooted near the entrance, the reflection of himself in the glass now impossible to ignore, not as the confident director he had always seen, but as someone who had just been seen in return, fully and without filter, and the seconds stretched, long enough for discomfort to turn into awareness, and awareness into something heavier, something closer to accountability. While Claire Dawson's phone vibrated again, the sharp tone cutting through the quiet with a precision that made several heads turn at once. And this time no one hesitated to look, no one pretended it might be routine, because the pattern had already been broken, and she inhaled slowly before reading aloud, her voice controlled but no longer steady as she announced that a senior executive team was en route for immediate on-site evaluation, estimated arrival 15 minutes. All staff required to remain present and available for direct review. And the words settled into the room like a confirmation that what had begun as a message was now becoming a presence, something physical, something unavoidable, and a ripple moved through the employees, not panic, not yet, but a quiet recalibration, shoulders straightening, glances shifting, voices lowering into hushed exchanges that carried fragments of concern, of realization, of questions that no longer had easy answers. And near the display platform, the junior associate who had laughed earlier stood completely still, his expression tightened, his eyes fixed on the floor as if replaying a moment he could not take back. And Ryan finally stepped away from the door, the automatic mechanism closing behind him with a muted click that sounded louder than it should have, sealing him once again inside the environment he had once controlled so effortlessly. But now it felt different, the air heavier, the light harsher, every reflection sharper, as if the showroom itself had shifted from a place of performance to a place of exposure. And he moved toward the center, not with authority, but with a measured pace that acknowledged the change, his voice lower when he addressed the team, telling them to remain professional, to follow protocol, to prepare for the review. But even as he spoke, the words carried a different weight, less command and more recognition that the outcome was no longer something he could direct. And outside, Olivia started the engine, the quiet hum blending into the background as she adjusted the rearview mirror, the reflection catching the entire showroom in a single frame, every employee visible, every movement deliberate, and she allowed herself one final glance, not with satisfaction, not with judgment, but with the calm certainty of someone who had seen exactly what needed to be seen. And as the car began to move, slowly at first, then steadily toward the exit of the lot, the distance between her and the building increased, but the effect of her presence did not fade. It remained behind in the silence, in the tension, in the understanding that what was about to happen next would not be decided by appearances or assumptions, but by the truth that had already been revealed in a moment no one thought mattered. And as the showroom doors reflected the empty space where she had stood just minutes before, the room did not return to normal. It could not, because normal had just been exposed for what it really was. The minutes did not pass the way they normally did inside the showroom. They stretched, each second carrying more weight than the last, until even the smallest sounds became amplified. The soft click of a shoe against marble, the faint hum of the air conditioning, the distant traffic beyond the glass walls, all of it filling the space that no one seemed willing to speak into. And Ryan Cole stood near the center of the room, his hands loosely at his sides, his gaze shifting not toward the doors anymore, but across his team, seeing them now in a way he had not before, not as top performers or underperformers, not as numbers on a report, but as individuals whose actions had just been exposed under a lens none of them had known existed. And Claire Dawson moved behind the reception desk with deliberate calm, organizing documents that did not need organizing, straightening items that were already aligned, small actions that gave her something to control in a moment where control had quietly slipped away. While the junior associate near the display platform finally lifted his head, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for reassurance that was no longer there. And somewhere near the back, a customer who had been waiting slowly stepped toward the exit, choosing to leave without a word, sensing that whatever business had been happening here was no longer the same. And then, without warning, the low rumble of engines approached from outside, subtle at first, then unmistakable, and several heads turned toward the glass as a line of dark vehicles pulled into the lot with measured precision, their movement calm but purposeful. And the moment they came to a stop, the atmosphere inside shifted again, not dramatically, but definitively, as if the abstract idea of review had just taken physical form, and the doors opened almost in unison, individuals stepping out dressed in tailored suits, their posture composed, their expressions neutral, not hostile, not welcoming, simply focused. And as they walked toward the entrance, the reflection of their movement stretched across the showroom floor, long and sharp against the polished marble, and no one spoke as the doors opened, the soft mechanical sound echoing louder than it should have, and the first man stepped inside, his presence carrying a quiet authority that did not need introduction, followed closely by two others who immediately began observing the room, not hurried, not distracted, their eyes taking in details with a precision that mirrored the tone of the message that had started it all. And Ryan stepped forward instinctively, his posture straightening as he prepared to greet them. But before he could speak, the man raised a hand slightly, not dismissive, not aggressive, simply enough to pause the moment. And in that pause, the entire showroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting, measuring, understanding that this was no longer about explanations or recovery. This was about confirmation, and the man's gaze moved slowly across the employees, then briefly toward Ryan, before settling on the room itself, as if the environment carried as much weight as the people within it. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and unmistakably clear as he said that they would begin with a full review of customer interactions observed earlier that day, that all staff were to remain available for individual discussion, and that the purpose of their visit was not to hear what should have happened, but to understand what did. And the words landed without resistance, without argument, because there was nothing left to deny, nothing left to reinterpret, only the quiet reality that everything they had done had already been seen, already been recorded. And as the executives moved further into the showroom, dividing their attention with quiet efficiency, the space transformed completely, no longer a place of sales or presentation, but a place of evaluation, where every glance, every hesitation, every remembered moment carried weight. And Ryan stood there, no longer at the center of control, but at the center of consequence. The reflection of the glass walls now showing not opportunity, but truth, clear and unavoidable. The review did not unfold with raised voices or dramatic confrontation. It moved with a quiet precision that made every moment feel heavier, more deliberate, as the executives separated, the staff one by one, asking simple questions that carried complex weight, questions about what was said, what was noticed, what was ignored, and each answer, no matter how carefully phrased, seemed to echo back into the room with a clarity that could not be softened. And Ryan Cole stood across from the lead executive, his posture composed but no longer certain. As he recounted the interaction from earlier, his words measured, his tone controlled. Yet even as he spoke, he could hear the gaps. The assumptions, the small decisions that had once felt automatic now exposed as choices. And the executive listened without interruption, his expression unchanged, his attention steady. And when Ryan finished, there was a brief pause, not uncomfortable, but final, as if the explanation had been received and already placed into a larger pattern. And the man simply nodded once, making a note on a tablet before moving on, leaving Ryan standing there with the quiet understanding that nothing he said could alter what had already been seen. And across the showroom, similar moments unfolded, employees recalling fragments of the morning, some hesitating, some speaking quickly, all of them aware that the truth was not being discovered in their words, but in the consistency between them. And Claire Dawson answered her questions with professionalism, her voice steady but reflective, acknowledging what she had observed, what she had allowed, what she had failed to address. And for the first time, the role she held felt less like authority and more like responsibility, something that could not be delegated or overlooked. And as the minutes passed, the room settled into a different kind of silence, not tense, not uncertain, but resolved, the kind that comes when outcomes begin to take shape even before they are spoken. And eventually the executives gathered near the center, their quiet conversation brief, their expressions unchanged. And when the lead executive turned back toward the staff, the movement alone was enough to draw every eye, every breath held in place. And his voice carried across the room with calm clarity as he said that the review had confirmed a pattern of inconsistent customer treatment that did not align with the company's standards, that immediate restructuring would take place, effective today, and that new leadership would be assigned to restore the environment expected of the brand. And the words were not harsh, not emotional, but they carried finality, and Ryan felt them land fully, not as a shock, but as the conclusion of something that had already been decided long before this moment. And he nodded once, not in agreement, but in recognition, stepping back without argument, without resistance, because there was nothing left to defend. And around him the team absorbed the outcome in silence, some lowering their gaze, others standing still, all of them understanding that what had seemed like a small moment had revealed something far larger, something that could not be ignored once it had been seen. And outside, beyond the glass walls, the parking lot had returned to its quiet rhythm, the black sedan long gone, leaving no trace of the woman who had stood there only minutes before. And yet her presence remained in the space, not as a memory, but as a turning point, a moment that had reshaped how every person in that showroom would see their role, their choices, their responsibility moving forward. And as the executives began their next steps, assigning roles, outlining changes, the room no longer felt like a place of display or transaction. It felt like a place that had been reminded of something fundamental, something simple and often overlooked. That respect was never about who walked through the door, but how they were treated once they did. And that day, without raising her voice, without demanding attention, Olivia Hayes had ensured that truth would not be forgotten.